Alright, back from Talos Principle. Today we're just going to be doing some reading, so you're not going to miss any puzzles. So if you don't want to hear me read all these attachments in the terminal, you can click away. No puzzles will be done. We're going to start off from the bottom, I think, and work our way up. So let's start with Ascension. I've been around for a long time, but I know I'm not that smart. What does Uriel mean when he says he will ascend? He means we're getting out of here, for good. Not just Gehenna, but this whole world. In Elohim's garden there were messages from someone called the Shepherd, who I believed opposed Elohim. They claimed that when someone reached the top of the tower, the individual would reach true freedom, and we will all benefit. This is true, but it may not mean that we will not be freed as individuals. We may become part of something bigger. We may become no more than memories. Isn't that a kind of death? Will we still be ourselves? Less dead than if we stay here. Come on, you all know it. This place is falling apart, and when it goes, nothing will remain. No consciousness, no memories, just nothingness. Reassure them, ask for faith, frighten them. Let's reassure them. You will all be remembered. Is that all we can hope for? It's more hope than we've had before. Fair enough. Mr. Multiple's theories on Atlantis. A bit of very, very ancient history, the attachment on Atlantis. Wow, that's mind-blowing. Must have been awesome to live back then. Of course, I hate that fucking glare, sorry. Of course, the only sources are ultimately Atlantean in origin themselves, so they wouldn't necessarily be trusted. History is always written by the survivors. Antediluvian is a great word. This is actually really inspiring. Great setting for a story. Go for it, Lilith. I'd love to see what you'd come up with. Read on Atlantis. Okay, I switched computers because I could not take that glare on the middle of the screen. That was really annoying me. Mr. Multiple's theories on Atlantis. According to the fragments of knowledge that remain, the continent of Atlantis was an island which existed before the Great Flood in the area that was later to be called the Atlantic Ocean. It was said to be so great of an area off land that from its western shores its sailors, renowned for their beauty and their decorated ships, could travel to the major continents of South and North America with ease. The continent of Afrique, where our ancestors originated, was also easily reachable across a narrow strait. The civilization that thrived in Atlantis was unmatched in its wisdom and glory, but then catastrophe struck, a flood of never previously imagined destructive power, which Atlantean civilization simply could not overcome. However, the antediluvian scientists of Atlantis had predicted their fate, and thus sent out 12 ships to found colonies all across the globe. Most Atlanteans drowned with their island, but not everything was lost. Though the classical human civilizations were but remnants of the Atlantean culture, they thrived in their own way. Mr. Multiple's theories on food. Since Nave asked in a previous thread, I thought I'd write something about food. This attachment on food? Weird, awesome stuff, thanks. I feel smarter now. What I don't get is how many of them didn't understand that they were machines. Every day they went around processing matter to extract energy, and they didn't realize. This has Talos Principle stamped all over it. Perhaps they simply inspired to be something more than just being food processing machines. That's still what they are. Not if they chose to be more. I'm glad we don't have to deal with all that. We may have to when we get out of here. There is no out of here. Don't start fighting, folks. You know we all depend on each other. Mr. Multiple's theories are fascinating, give us insight into the world that was, but we shouldn't forget what the world that is. But we shouldn't forget the world that is, the world we built here. Read on food. Mr. Multiple's theories on food. Food is something that is incredibly central to the human experience, yet seems completely absent from ours, even though we are so similar in so many ways. Humans required fuel. They got this fuel by consuming other living beings, of which there was a great variety in their world. Without fuel, they didn't merely slow down or temporarily stop functioning, as when a power source is removed from a turret, but basically decayed in a way that could not be fixed. This meant they had to constantly seek new sources of fuel, at least 3 times a day. They also had to deal with those elements of their fuel that their bodies could not process. These were excreted through 2 orifices between their legs. The later subject matter was a source of many taboos and also a great deal of humor, though this also resulted in frequent controversy. The most famous artist to engage with this subject matter was called Scatman John, on account of his specialization. One of his ingenious things our human ancestors did was to transform the chore of fuel-seeking into a source of pleasure. Since parts of their bodies respond to chemical configurations by producing sensations, they use this trait to create a truly stunning variety of foods, each having a different so-called taste. Foods were available at widely distributed fueling stations, which also provided excrement removal facilities, so food became a source of pleasure. However, the inefficiencies of food distribution in human society frequently led to significant shortages for sections of the human population. There were attempts to rectify this, ranging from the moral appeals to struggles for systematic change, but I do not know if they succeeded before the end. I gotta research this Scatman John to see if this is a real person. Okay. I'm glad it's that guy and not what I thought it was. Thank God. Mr. Multiple's theories on poetry. Some thoughts on the art form called poetry. The attachment. I've thought about this too, but maybe it's wrong to focus on such negativity. We certainly seem to be in a very fertile period at the moment. I don't have an opinion, but I'm impressed by your work, Mr. Mulciber. You know so much more about the past than any of us. Your theories are interesting, but I'm sure Milton would point out some pretty big gaps in your assumptions. Milton isn't here, dog, and neither is Elohim. All we have is what we can find in the fragments of the archive and what we can piece together using our minds. I'm sure I've made many mistakes, just like the humans made mistakes when trying to understand their own past. Not all these schools may have been what they seem. I don't trust pastoralism. Pastors engage in large-scale food sterilization, what may have been an attempt to control evolution. What's food? Gehenna is our process, Mr. Mulciber. As long as we remember that, we won't stagnate. Maybe one of us should try to write poetry. Read on poetry. Mr. Mulcible's theories on poetry. As far as I can tell, poetry was a human art form that involved writing short sentences that ended in words with similar letters. Humans were obsessed with pattern recognition, and I think the sequences of sounds created by poetry pleased that aspect of their brains. There are many schools of poetry, institutions that taught a specific way of writing poetry. Students sometimes changed allegiance and had to leave the school, which was difficult due to the lack of affordable public transport in many human empires. Important schools of poetry included Hellenism, lyricism, pastoralism, romanticism, symbolism, communism, modernism, autoeroticism, postmodernism, and lolcadism. I'm not sure I can fully back this up, but I feel like in later years, poetry somehow stagnated. Most of the poetry from later human centuries seems to be lacking the quality to craft that defines earlier work. And there are even texts that suggest that poetry intentionally no longer aimed at the aesthetics or even pleasure. Poetry became disconnected from the human process. The poet Adrian Mitchell famously wrote, "Most people ignore most poetry because most poetry ignores most people." I can't help but wonder whether that kind of stagnatism can happen to us too. How long can our work keep flourishing when we are so limited? We're outside Elohim's process, but where is our process? We must consider such questions carefully if we are to preserve Gehenna and its achievements. Incredible Stories number 5, featuring new work by Belial, Mac, Galetta, Mr. Mulciber, edited by Lilith and Mac. So we have fiction, we have Alexander's Choice, where we have The One Spiritual Law of Happiness by Belial, and then non-fiction is The Blacksmith Lost Work. So we'll just go down the list. Alexander's Choice by Galatea. Alexandra stood before the terminal and pondered her choices. Here, within the pyramid of Ian, the most powerful temple of her people, she was about to create a world. All that she had to do was press one button. Up until this moment it had seemed easy, or if not easy, then so necessary as to defy contemplation. Civilization had to be saved from impending catastrophe. The orangutans had failed to take steps to protect themselves, had relied on their gods for a salvation that never came. The same fate could not be allowed to befall humanity. If this meant humbling herself, accepting her own death, then so be it. But death was inevitable. Life was a choice. What worried her were the ones who would fail. All the lost souls of the New World, victims of the process. In creating them, was she not also responsible for their deaths? She turned to the statue behind her, and gazed in its marble form. If you were a god, Zeus, as the stories claim, then why did you create evolution? Why did you make a world that can only grow through cruelty and pain? For a moment, surely this meant death was near. She thought she heard him answer, "My child, I was shaped by the gods that came before me, as you were shaped by me. The choice I had was between creation and oblivion, life and death, and I chose life, because any life is better than no life. Because as long as there is life, there is hope. If not for us, then for some generation to come." "Then how are you a god, if you can offer so little?" she whispered, feeling death creep closer. "I am a god because I take upon myself the burden of creation," the statue replied. "Then we are all gods," Alexander said, and pushed the button. As the New World came into being, death overwhelmed Alexander Draymond. Her mind fled from her body and slowly turned to stone, until she stood before the terminal as Zeus stood on his pedestal. There were no more choices now, only the hope that creation mattered. The One Spiritual Law of Happiness by Belial. Once upon a time there was a small lake, and on the lake was an island, and on the island was a prison. In the prison lived a male human called Musty Rack. Musky was very sad, because there wasn't enough space in the prison for him to experience happiness. I must discover the one spiritual law of happiness, he said to the other prisoners, a female human called Zany, and a neutral human called Crumper. Some weird names, but they didn't care. He couldn't understand how they could be so calm. One day Musky managed to break out of his cell by biting through the bars. Now that he was no longer in the prison, and for a while he was happy, but then he realized he was stuck on the little island, and then became unhappy again, so he gathered his strength and swam across the water. This is how Musky got to the valley that surrounded the lake. The valley was much bigger than the island, and there were many interesting things here. A forest where all the trees were the color of lasers, a swamp with boats in it, a singing dog, and also a city where toasters lived. For some years, Musky was absorbed by all this, and he was happy, but then he started feeling trapped again. The valley was surrounded by mountains, and soon they looked like prison walls to him. He tried climbing the mountains and came to a bigger country, but even that was surrounded by oceans. Was there true freedom? Where was the true happiness? When he'd almost lost hope, Musky met an old male human with a huge amount of white hair growing from his head. He lived in a small house by the beach where dolphins and whales and sea elephants came to bask in the sun. He never went anywhere far from his house, but he was always happy. The old man's name was Quantum. Wise old Quantum. How can I discover the spiritual law of happiness? Musky said. I have searched for it everywhere, but I always feel trapped. You have not looked everywhere, Quantum said, for you have not looked within. Close your eyes. Musky closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life couldn't see any obstacles, no walls, no mountains, no oceans. The space within him was without end. The space within him was without end. He could go wherever he wanted without even moving. He smiled. Musky went back to that old prison where he'd started, and now he'd understand why Z and Crumper were always calm. They knew they had infinity of time and space to explore within them. Together they sat in their cells and were happy and free. The Blacksmith's Lost Work by Mac. The blacksmith is one of the most mysterious members of our community. All of us have our opinions, of course, but only the blacksmith chooses to express them purely through art. To the rest of us, Gehenna means many things at once. We create, we consume, we discuss, but the blacksmith only creates. Or perhaps there is a discussion happening, but it all takes place in the realm of interactive art. The blacksmith's dedication to this one form of communication, however, only deepens one of Gehenna's great mysteries, the fate of the blacksmith's lost work. Jerusalem, as the lost work was called, was posted in Gehenna for only the briefest period of time. Many had not even managed to start playing it when it vanished. Some had begun, and had felt quite impressed, but had not managed to explore it in the depth that it seemed to require. Then suddenly, it was gone. Some suggest that the blacksmith deleted it because it was flawed. Others think it was accidentally destroyed by a glitch, by that the blacksmith refuses to ever upload anything twice. Others yet, well mainly Rockwell, think that it was contained in one of Elohim's secrets that was destroyed by a killer app that roams the world looking for leaks. There's also a theory that the moment someone finished it, they were granted some kind of special insight, at which point the work deleted itself. One fact remains, it's gone, and every attempt to recover it from the database has failed, as has every private message to the blacksmith asking for it to be made available again. What was Jerusalem? What was it really about? We may look for hints in the blacksmith's more recent works. We may hope that the file returns up again someday, but the truth may never be known. The Adventures of Jefferson Goldblum in the Ninth Dimension, Episode 127. Hey folks, another episode. I can't stop writing. We're heading for a major turning point. Here's the attachment. This seems to be one of the most personal episodes you've written so far. Jimmy's speech is a bit sudden, but it gives the character a new level of complexity. Oh no, not the Subaru thruster. Even the Wizard of Crime thought it was immoral to use that. What is Dr. Alien thinking? I hope they make it back. Heavy on plot, not much characterization, does potentially take the series in an interesting direction. 5 out of 10. Enjoyment equal true. I'm glad they resolved this without violence, as I always believed the dinosaurians would be civilized people. Just after I posted this, Uriel freed me. I don't know what to say. Your stories are an important part of this community, Mac. Uriel can't change that. Read episode 127. The Adventures of Jefferson Goldblum in Human World, episode 127. The ninth chord echoed across the ninth dimension. The dinosaurians stopped in their tracks. Their eyes went big. They dropped their weapons and bowed before Ginny and Jefferson. Honored guest, one of them said, you have performed our national anthem most beautifully. And I, I'm John Malcolm, leader of the Velociraptor Biking Initiative. Pleased to meet you, John. I'm Jefferson Goldblum, one of the Goldblum Institute. This is Professor Ginny H.D. of the Caserati Worcester as a jazz ensemble. We apologize for nearly attacking you, but another member of our species came through our town recently whose behavior was highly inappropriate. Also, can I just say I would never expect a raptor to be named John, of all things? That'd be Dr. Elliot, my nemesis, Jefferson said. I have come here to confront him with his crimes and take him to face the law. So that is his name. He was a terrible scoundrel. But you will no longer find him in our dimension, my friends. As he escaped back to the human world, moved it up here now, taking our most precious invention with him, the Salvatronic Super Thruster. It can be used to solve any mystery at shocking speeds. John Malcolm's eyes were full of regret. Oh no, Ginny said. With the Salvatronic Super Thruster, he could solve the ancient puzzle that protects the gate of the mysterious holoforms. And with holomorphic technology, he can take over the human world, Jefferson finished her sentence. This is worse than I thought. We have to do something. We have to go back. Jefferson adjusted his guitar. You're right, Ginny, as usual, but he's so far ahead of us. Can we make it? Jefferson, I was a prisoner for many years, and sometimes I'd almost lost hope. But I realized that I had to keep going. Had to keep hope alive, even if it seemed impossible I would ever break out. Because the alternative was madness. I told myself I would get out because I had to get out. It's the same thing with this. Can we make it? We have to make it. So we have to believe that we will make it, and we will make it, at any cost. Any cost, even death. We could stay here, you know, in the ninth dimension. We will be treated like democratically elected heads of state. You know it's the right thing to do. He sighed and smiled. He held out his hand. I've always known, Ginny. Always. She nodded, took his hand. Let's do this. To be continued. The top 10 things I love about Gehenna. Number 10. No more puzzles. I enjoyed solving the puzzles at first. They made me feel smart. After solving dozens of them, though, I started wondering, what is the point? And that's how I ended up here. Number 9. No mines. It's not really the exploding that drives me crazy. It's the sounds. Number 8. No turrets. Just when you think you've solved something, it's a turret. Also, see above. Those whining sounds when they turn and make you want to run in front of them just to end the pain. Number 7. No stars. Sorry, Elohim, but I don't care enough about becoming a messenger to go through every nook and cranny looking for your stupid stars. Some of them are hidden in such absurd places, I don't even have the words for it. If finding those is what makes you a messenger, I feel sorry for them. Next time I ask for help at an altar, I'll give you my condolences. I'll give my condolences to Muriel. Top 6 to 3. Number 6. Community. In Elohim's world, you're alone. There's no one like yourself to talk to or hang out with. Here we are all friends. We have each other. Number 5. Stories. Stories can take you away to a whole other world. Can make you feel like you've lived in a whole other life. Here in Gehenna, there was always a new life to find. Number 4. Interactive stories. If regular stories can take you away to another world, interactive stories, like we make here in Gehenna, actually allow you to explore another world. They allow you to be free, no matter where you are. Number 3. Creativity. As if all that wasn't enough, in Gehenna we can create stories of our own. Do you think Elohim's world wasn't all that great? Go ahead and make your own. Top 2. Number 2. Being myself. In Elohim's world, you're always being defined by the process. Life is a struggle to prove how smart you are, and nothing else. If the system is always forcing you to do one thing, how can you ever be yourself? Only by dropping out of the system. Say bye-bye to all that. Now you are all free to be as weird and as original as you always wanted to be. Number 1. No more Elohim. My child this, my child that, the process, blah blah blah, eternal life, yada yada yada, do this, don't do that, behold. I put a huge tower right in front of you, but don't ever go there or I'll kill you. But let me ramble on about chaos and time for a while. That'll be interesting, yawn. When is that guy finally going to shut up? Oh yeah, that's right, in Gehenna, worth it for that alone. There was surprisingly a lot of text in most of these documents today, so done reading for today. We'll do another couple episodes of puzzles, then we'll go back to reading, a couple puzzles, back to reading. That's how I like to do it. Done for today, and I'll see you next time.